trans. There we go. And we've talked military, and we've talked peace and war and terrorism. We've had all the imaginable topics over the last 4 years we've been doing our podcast. But this one is just personal. It's raw. It's private. Brian Vogt is not Calvin Coolidge or Abraham Lincoln or George Washington. Or is he? I mean, for a lot of us, he is actually one of the more important people we've ever met in our entire lives. If you're in the Littleton area, Centennial area, Garden Life, state of Colorado, I mean, he literally knows tens of thousands of people. And almost everybody he's met, I'm not saying everybody loves him, they probably don't, but almost everybody that's met him, he's touched their life in a little tiny way, in different ways. I know this because I've known him for 29 years. I spent the last, I don't know, a bunch of nights with him before he died, and we talked about all this kind of stuff. I know him really well, but so does everybody else. So this is going to be a very unusual show. I have no idea whether it'll be a nice conversation or a good conversation, but I'd like you to give some history perspectives on friendships and meaningful impact we have on each other's lives. You've talked about how you said a quote 2 weeks ago. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago and Brian was still alive. And as soon as you said it, I went, oh my God, that's Brian. Let's see if I can even get it semi right. You said there's a Jefferson monument, and somebody famous said, well, why isn't there a monument for Alexander Hamilton? Do you remember that part of the conversation?
Yeah, this is an apocryphal story, but it's meant to illustrate why Alexander Hamilton is, or how Alexander Hamilton is so important to the United States. Yeah.
Well, let's say it, because as soon as you said it,
Oh,
I tell the story, because as soon as you said, I went, that's
so
Brian.
a visitor comes to Washington, D.C., and he visits the Jefferson Memorial, and he says, it's a very impressive thing, and says, well, where is the monument to Hamilton? And the answer is, if you'd like to see the monument to Hamilton, look around you. In other words, Jefferson got the statue, but if you look around what actually built the United States of America, that's the monument to Alexander Hamilton.
Yeah.
It sounds
And
like for your friend, his monument is, if you'd like to see the monument to Mr. Vogt, you look around.
yeah, it is so true. So, in a half hour or so, we'll open it up to anybody who has questions or comments who would like to say something. I know that for a fact. I watched him give speeches in front of 1,000, and I was engaged in conversations with just three of us, Brian, me, and another friend, either that I wanted to introduce to him or he wanted to have me know. And we'd walk around the gardens and talk about life and perspective. And almost every single conversation I was observed of Brian, it wasn't spiritual in a religious kind of way. Although there's occasionally there were, especially if we were talking religion, but most of it, but there was a spiritual element or a deep element or I think Brian was on a different. You haven't asked any questions yet, so I should just stop. But Brian
Well,
was on an element who was different than the rest of us. He was at a higher plane or a different tone or a different vibration, a different level of maturity. It was a really impactful person in many people's lives.
I think this happens for many of us who are involved and know some people who are in public life. And I'll just use you and Bart as an example, and Tony, our producer, the same way, which is that um, there are certain people in public life that no matter how many times you're in a meeting with them, you don't know who you're in that meeting with. You never really see the real version of them, and there's no authentic person beneath that public persona. And then you do meet a handful of people in public life where you say, this guy is exactly the same in public, or a gal, as he or she is in private. And their public service is an expression of their inner selves. And that inner self, for all of its, and what's often great about these kinds of authentic people is that then you can take them for what they are, and in all of their goodness. And I see, it's funny, my neighbor across the street was the city councilman for 30 years, and when people would say, but he did this, and you're like, yeah, well, that's the way he does that. You know, like you take you just know, well, he's a human being, and I'll take the whole package because I know that he's a public-minded person, and what he's trying to do is this is a guy when his head hits the pillow every night, he's trying to do what's best for everybody.
Yeah.
And when he wakes up in the morning, he's trying to do what's best for everybody. And he's going to be wrong about some of those things, or I'm going to disagree with him about some of those things. But you can never doubt the intent of their heart. And
Yeah.
uh,
Boy,
and
is
when you
that
come
fun.
across those people who are engaged in true public service, not trying to get ahead for themselves, but with the and this is kind of a shortcut term we used to use back when I was more involved in politics. And we would just say, like, do they have the heart of a servant? Uh, and I know that can have religious overtones, but but we just meant, is this somebody who is ambitious for their own sake, or is this somebody who has the heart of a servant? And we would just use it as a sort of shortcut to
That is
describe.
Brian. That's Brian to a T. And you met him, of course, when you came out to visit Colorado. We had lunch with him at a little Mexican restaurant. Um, the but everybody, let me interrupt ourselves. Brian would always say, "Hey, don't worry, I can translate Brackney," because sometimes I'm confused and I'm off on some tangent, and he goes, I'll translate later." And so this is a crazy hard for me to do because I'm trying to translate Brian with my Brackney to friends that have joined us today, and that's obviously not very effective. Would this surprise you that Brian would be pissed? Pissed is not a good. He wouldn't use that word. Brian would be irritated or chagrined that we're even having this conversation about him today. He doesn't want to talk about him. He wants to talk about us or some issue or some thing we're working on together, and he didn't want the spotlight on him. And people that don't know him would say, well, he's had the spotlight on him for like 50 years. What do you mean he doesn't want the spotlight on him? You go, yeah, but he doesn't want a monument. Now he might get one. He might get a plaque. He's had some. He might get awards. He just got a major one last 3 weeks before he died. He doesn't want it though. Is he human? Uh-huh. He was honored. He was deeply appreciative of the plaque, but that wasn't the goal. That wasn't the desire to be recognized. He wants to talk about us and how we have a better society. Would that surprise you about him from what you met when
Not,
you
I
met?
mean, well, I had lunch with him once. I don't want to pretend like we
Right.
were best friends or anything, or I had any kind of intimate relationship with him. But I kind of want to take it back to, if you don't mind me commandeering the conversation a
You're the
little.
interviewer.
Yeah,
Head away.
the first, I guess, what's your origin story? Where did you first meet him? You said you've known him for 29 or 30 years. Where did you get,
Yeah.
where did you first encounter him?
So Brian was a big man on campus. He
Which
was born in
campus?
Aurora, but he was at Heritage High School, first graduating class. He was class president all 3 or 4 years. Well, I think the Heritage had four, and then he went to CU and was a big man on campus up there too. But of course, I didn't know him then. I was a few years younger than him. But growing up in the Littleton area, his dad was the county sheriff who died in office. I mean, he was larger than legend. He was one of those old time Western sheriffs. I mean, this is something inappropriate in today's world. Every what is it, December 30, New Year's Eve, at midnight, he would go out his front porch. I think it's like the sixth home off Ridge Road and Broadway, and fire his handgun into the air, shoot it off at midnight. A single bullet. Well, gosh, now there's a lot of people down south. There wasn't any people down south, so it wasn't dangerous. But now there's a couple 100,000 people. But he was an old time Western sheriff, and his mom, and then he died in office, and his mom was a single mom with his brother. I mean, Terry and Brian, two kids. And I don't know, how do you don't lose your home? She had to figure out how to work and get a job. So she took an accounting class and then she ran for county treasurer and became one of the most well-respected county treasurer in our history. So he comes from good stock, so to speak. He then after CU went to work at the Reagan administration and don't say Nancy's department. Just say no. Remember that? You're not old enough. Just say
Sure.
no.
Well, I was a
It-
kid when it was going on, but that
yeah.
was
Well, it was
relevant
one of
for me.
It was one of Brian's only failures in life. He was in the office to make sure Americans didn't use drugs, and so he
I
failed.
didn't use drugs, so maybe it
Well,
worked.
good. He succeeded with you. After that, he got hired at the chamber, this is all before I knew him. But he got hired at the chamber for a few years, I think 4, and then he became a very young, I think he was like 29-year-old president of the South Metro Denver Chamber of Commerce. And then I met him a few years after that when I decided to run for county commissioner. Of course, you go meet the big man on campus. You don't go talk to losers. You go talk to somebody who has some influence and clout and can help you get elected. And he did.
That's why your political career stalled, John. You see voters as losers. How dare you? Um,
Yeah, well, you don't talk to
every
individual
vote,
losers.
every vote counts the
Darn it.
same, John. If I was your campaign advisor, I would
Well,
people
good
like
news is
poor
good
people and rich
news.
people all get one vote. Uh,
Good news is I'm not running for office,
yeah.
and I was very wise. And
But I
Brian
do
was.
understand that you can
Yeah,
reach many more voters by meeting community leaders first.
yeah,
And so you were running for office, and he was already somebody with just an established. He was already established in public service, and then his family had a tradition of family service. So you were well aware of who he was before you ever met. So do you remember anything about your first impressions?
yeah. Brian has all sorts of first impressions. One was his mom, actually. So my first impression of Brian is his
Hmm.
mother, and who unfortunately died fairly soon after we became close, and of course went to her funeral. But well, I had to go meet her running for office, of course, and this translates over to Brian. The You do remember old style political activists, the type that would, when you moved in the neighborhood, they'd bring you a cake or a pie and say, "Welcome to the neighborhood. Are you a Republican or a Democrat?" And it's
Right.
like, and they'd know how to engage with you then, either ignore you if you were the opposite party, or to invite you to the picnic next month.
Yeah,
Uh,
call you a loser behind your back.
yeah, exactly. Well, one of those old folks in our neighborhood was a prestigious activist, as I was, and said, "I just have to go meet Dorothy Vogt." But before, and this won't surprise you, you know me pretty well. Before you meet Dorothy, clean your fingernails underneath your fingernails, cut them and clean them, and
Wow.
polish your shoes. And I don't know if I had dirty fingernails or dirty shoes, but it didn't matter. When you go meet Dorothy Vogt, you present yourself in a way that's respectful. And so I hope I did. She ended up supporting me. But Brian is the kind of person, that's an impression. When you're around Brian, you need to be on really good behavior.
Okay.
Um, and I don't, not because he's some priest or judge or CEO or it's just he expects or demands that you treat each other with respect. And it's not in a haughty way. It's just I don't know. Brian has a unique ability that very few people curse around him. I do occasionally. And he didn't particularly like it, but he tolerated it sometimes. But I don't know, you're on good behavior around Brian. That's my first impression about Brian is you become a better human being when you're in his presence.
So there's an old we use this modern word charisma, or as the kids say, riz. And I joke with students, they only know about this word because of TikTok videos. But the word charisma and but the belief in charismatic leadership, it wasn't really about charming people. That was not the origin of the word, but what really meant is someone's inner goodness externally visible.
Wow.
And what effect does that have on other people? And what she wanted for your church leadership was when they say that like Puritans believed in charismatic leadership, they didn't mean someone who is able to lie to you more effectively. What they meant is that if someone has the spirit of God and it's in them so much, if it's in their bones, if it's in their flesh, and that spirit of goodness is in them, that it is actually externally visible to others, and it's the kind of thing that will have an effect on everyone. And it sounds like that was the effect that Brian had on other people. He didn't have to. I mean, people sometimes say same thing about George Marshall, the man who was led our military during World War II. The only person who both FDR and Dwight Eisenhower were both intimidated by? Well, it wasn't because he was yelling at them. He was just somebody who had that kind of presence that had an effect on the people around him. It sounds like Brian also had that
He
quality.
did, and I'm so glad we're having this conversation. I would have no idea that you would be able to tie this together in a historical way with the leaders that we admire.
It's the only thing I can do, John. I don't.
You also speak of George Washington and as having this presence that everybody, just like universally, he could have been king if he wanted to, and he didn't.
Yes, and but in the case of George Washington, it was something he worked really hard on. So I don't know. We haven't talked enough about Brian to know about if this is something that, as a child, that he worked on, in order to emulate his parents. Although that does sometimes happen. But
Interesting. You probably had a combination. Listening to our conversation, you probably had a combination. He was very intentional and he was strategic. And so I do think he worked on it, but it also came naturally to him. I think it was an instinctual, inherent kind of thing. So I don't know whether it was made or born or made, but my instinct, it was both. We only have like, I don't know, 10 or 20 minutes more
well,
before we open it up.
yeah, so I want to get into, like, did you ever work side by side with him? Sometimes there's another level of admiration that comes from seeing people in public life actually do work.
Yeah,
Uh,
so let me answer that in two ways. Let me turn around here for just a second. Brian and I are the. Can you see this? I can't see
yeah,
mine.
yeah.
These are newspaper articles on both sides of this book.
Okay.
There's more. So when we incorporated the city of Centennial, we worked daily for 2.5 years, but that is a volunteer, and he wasn't my boss. I was a commissioner, and he was the CEO of the chamber, and we incorporated the largest city in the history of the United States from
But
scratch.
in some ways, isn't that more impressive? I
Oh,
mean, that somebody who is working that hard when they don't have to on
oh,
something being
and
guided.
Professor, let me interrupt. I just can't. I worked with him, and I still don't understand this resolve. You're a citizen. You're a leader of an organization, the South Metro Denver Chamber. Cynthia, were you the chair of the board during that time, or before or after? I can't hear. Well,
Um,
go ahead.
I got it now. I think I was chair of the board in like 92 or 93. Is that about the same time? Not quite.
Yeah, that was the era, I think. But gosh, I'd have to look at the dates in the newspaper. But you were familiar with Brian's leadership in this, before,
Yeah.
during, or after?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
It was incredible, Professor. Sure, you've got a salary as the staff member of the South Metro Chamber. He, though, a private detective was hired from our nemesis, the city that we were competing with, and they investigated our private lives. They were digging through our trash and seeing if any of us had any scandals or I mean, it was really pretty brutal for a while. The city to the north of us sent a letter to every single investor of the South Metro Chamber, every member of the chamber, demanding that Brian Vogt be fired. Because what role is it of a chamber of commerce to form a city, especially when there's city businesses in that city? It was and to the board of directors, he would call and say, "You need to fire this CEO, President Brian Vogt." We needed a bond when we went to and you might take yourself off video if you wish now, Cynthia. You don't have to, but you can. Um, and and Professor, we needed um, a bond of $100,000. He was going to sell his condo to put up the bond for. Who does that? No one does that kind of thing in a
Yeah.
city. A volunteer effort, your name, your reputation, your job, your property, you're going to give to the citizens of a city he didn't live in. He lived in
And
Littleton.
right. And we all know, the person who gets hired as the, new person in charge of the chamber, and it's somebody who's from outside the area, and they don't mind going to a few meetings of the Kiwanis or whatever. And they don't but it's a stepping stone for something else. And then we also are familiar with the person in public life who will get into a fight in order to become famous, but they don't really care about the cause. But then when you see someone actually suffering the slings and the arrows, who's also doing the hard work, that is the that's the rarest combination, and a person of the highest character.
Boy, you're
And
getting Brian again. Are you sure you're not a psychologist or a sociologist? I know those are insults to both of you. You're a historian, but
well, I just, you study human beings in the past, that's what the humanities are. Human
okay.
being, the character flaws of human beings has been the same for thousands of years.
So we have like 15 minutes now before I open it up to Q&A, and I'm just so pleased. I know a bunch of these folks that have signed in with us, and they're all good, decent people, and I'm just so honored that they're here, and I want to make sure their voices heard
Well,
more than mine.
I did get a question in the private chat that I don't know. We could probably talk about this for a half hour, but if you were to, I don't want to skip the middle part of your relationship with him and his career, so I do want to get back to that if we can. But it's an important question, which is, what would you say the unfinished work of Brian Vogt is?
Oh gosh, that I don't know who. Don't tell me who asked that. Wow, because I'm not sure I can tell you without crying.
How do we honor his memory by
Um,
helping to complete the work that he was working on?
Yeah, gosh, what a beautiful question. So the last couple weeks were really tough on Brian physically. The good news is his mind was with us till the end. I mean, the very end, the probably a couple hours before he died. And his heart was 100% with us the whole time. I have zero doubt of that. His mind, maybe, it was a difficult. He was in tremendous pain. But I will tell you that we had a ton of these conversations. I mean, every night, one night until I was there, I spent the night, I don't know, 8 nights out of the last 11 or something. We had lots of time together in the middle of the night. Uh, he thought he was going to beat this professor the day of. He was going to go in for another radiation treatment the day he died. He was hoping to do all sorts of stuff with his life. He wanted to do all sorts of stuff. I don't want to get into politics because I think it would dishonor his whole legacy. Because but every day we talked politics for 30 years. I mean, that's the basis of our relationship. Is we love, eat, breathe, and think politics, national, state, local. But I don't want to get into it because right now politics is so divisive. What was his goal? For the last year or two, he said his goal, single-minded goal, is kindness. That's what he wanted to do. He was fighting the political drama and the animosity that we have through plants and the people that plant them and name them and organize them and the just pure joy of people walking the gardens. He believed he was fighting a negative culture in America through being a positive light at the gardens. And I would critique him some over that. And I go, they won't know that. That won't translate. And he goes, I don't care. You don't talk about things, you do stuff. Talking is fine. We have to have talk, it's part of culture. But you've got to do things. If you want to make change, you do things and you don't talk about what you hate, you do what you love. Those are the kind of things, the unfinished business that he had. He did have a political point or two that at some point I may reveal or not, or maybe I'll just have to do it in my life and not because he can't defend himself after his death.
Well, I
But
know we've quoted Theodore Roosevelt on this point many times, but it sounds like he agreed with when Theodore Roosevelt said, "I care about the man who takes the next step, not the one who theorizes about the 200th step. I
yeah,
don't care about the person who fights Beelzebub in the abstract, but every day you wake up and you do your duty according to the old standards."
wow, gosh, I'm so glad we're having this conversation. You're deeper than I am, Professor. Yeah, that's awesome. He had a variety of agendas. Let's just say that up till the end, and he didn't have an end until the day of his death, he planned on doing things and caring for people and making a difference. One thing about, I want to make sure this comes out before we open it up. Um, I don't have this ability, and I hardly anyone has the ability. Well, we all do it in some way, but he had a really deep ability to listen to people. I just kind of, you're having a conversation with him about sports or music. He loved music. He loved animals. He loved Colorado. I mean, there's lots of different topics as a human. He adored music, weird music like you. I mean, really weird, absurd, and he loved diversity. I mean, if it was unusual, different colors, shapes, history, backgrounds, anything that didn't look like him, he loved. It was curious. He wanted to meet people that were different than him, that thought different and acted different and sang different and grew up different. And so almost everybody could see that he was actually looking at them. He was looking at them and he was listening to them. It
So
was a
in both
neat thing.
in both the short term and the long term, how did he change you? You know, how did he
Oh,
change you when you were interacting with him, and how did he change you in a way that you know is permanent?
so there's two people besides my parents, my wife Meredith, who you've met several times, I think now,
Yeah.
and Brian. And I've had other mentors, a soccer coach and a mentor that got me into law school from college. I mean, there's a lot of people that have influenced my life. But if I didn't know Brian, let's keep this short because I want to talk about Brian instead of me. But I would be a traditional conservative, angry Republican, and I might be a congressman. I, I, that's kind of how I was leaning when I was a young man. I was mad. I was angry. Well, I wasn't. I mean, people that know me, I wasn't really angry, but I kind of like tough guys, and I like giving a fight. And in fact, when we were incorporating the city, I would always say, that was so bad, Brian. I'm going to go punch that mayor. I'm telling you, somebody's got to punch him, and it should be me. And he's going, "Will you stop it? You're not going to really punch him. And if you did, would that really help the cause? No, stop talking like that, please. Don't go punch the mayor of the." But I liked that combative style. Brian changed me in a much deeper way, and I'm not a very good student, as you can tell. But I would have probably been a Republican congressman and been fighting on behalf of Trump. Probably, I'd be Lauren Boebert or Josh Hawley or something. I'd be somebody. To be frank, I don't particularly like that kind of style. And
I was
but
gonna say, I hope that I give you a little credit, John.
yeah,
That
but that
yeah.
style but as we've talked a lot about, Professor, that style is a part of me. I have elements of me that is authentic. And that's not Brian at all. He's changed my life in every way. Spiritually, physically, not physically. I'm probably a better influence on him physically. Almost every way. He's that influential of a person. But it's not just me. I think he truly makes everybody better. Everybody he's ever met. He'll give a speech in front of 800. I saw this live, 800 people, and there'll be a line of 100 people to talk to him afterwards, saying what an insightful comment that was. And let me give one instinct on Brian. He was speaking on economic development or international trade or garden attendance rates or the garden groups or something. But it was never about international trade or economic growth it was, but he always had some deeper message about how we relate to each other and how we should treat each other and what this is all about. Why are we here? What America's about, what our state's about, so I think that's what resonated with people is he tried to take them up a level or two, um, you know, up 30,000 feet, I guess, is commonly talked about. I mean, he would talk to people, but not without being arrogant, without saying, "Hey, you're talking about something super. Don't go punch the mayor, John." He'd say, "Well, wouldn't this be a better way to accomplish what we want?" But without making you feel stupid or immature or, you know, well, he did that to me once in a while too. But for the most part, he could just inspire people to call their higher calling without like being lectured to. He,
So before we open it up to general questions, I wanted to maybe ask Bart if he had any specific memories or what the nature of your relationship was like with Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I did not have the kind of relationship with Brian that John, has, but Brian was somebody, he was pretty amazing. That's really all I can say. I mean, Brian, he was very courageous, but he was courageous almost in like a kind of a Ronald Reagan type of courage. It's like he wasn't courageous, like he wasn't grabbing a gun or grabbing some, weapon or doing the kind of thing, John, you were talking about a minute ago. Brian he seemed to always know what was right. And I'm not sure how he got to those conclusions, but he did. And once he was there, he was going to move the ball forward, and he was going to get to where he had decided a correct place was. That's where Brian was going. And I have all sorts of, Brian is, John and Brian are probably the reasons I got elected to the office that I held because, both of them came to me and basically said, okay, we want you to do this. And they kind of trained me to do it, because I was not a natural candidate for public office at all. I remember the first time Brian kind of looked at me and said, okay, well, tell me why you want to be on the city council. And oh my God, I mean, my answer was not even in the stratosphere of where it needed to be. But Brian just kind of looked at me and he said, okay, well, I probably took 20 minutes to explain why I wanted to be on city council. Brian looked at me and said, all right, you got to boil that down to about 20 seconds.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have to talk to a whole bunch of people and you got to tell them in 20 seconds why you should be doing this, and you got to do it in a credible way. And then you have to be able to walk away and know that that person at least thinks positively of you.
Yeah. Turn your attention to a bumper sticker. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. But it wasn't an insincere kind of approach to life. It was basically him knowing how you had to do something, and by gosh, this was the way it was going to work. And it wasn't dictatorial because he was trying to include you in moving the ball forward. He wasn't trying to exclude you from the process. He wasn't trying to tell you exactly how to do it. He was basically kind of inspiring you to do it. And it was really pretty amazing.
And that's, thinking back to a conversation we had about statesmanship probably 2 years ago. But when I don't know if you remember this, we described the difference between statesmanship and sophistry, which is if you can tell small pieces of the truth in service of a larger lie, or you can tell a version of the truth in service to a larger truth. And a real statesman, a real community leader, is someone who inspires people to be the best version of themselves. And it sounds like that was your experience with Brian, where he didn't want you to be a different person. He just wanted you to be the best version of yourself and be able to communicate that to the community, and let the Democratic chips fall where they may, but at least let people know the best real version of you. And that's the only way you can build a democratic republic. I mean, that's the only way you can build a civic life that will have meaning and character, and that citizens will believe in over the long term. I mean, just to tie it back to something John said earlier, that's the monument. And I'm glad that both of you got to have that experience. But before we open it up to sort of Q&A, I just wanted to know if John would tell me what it was like. Did you really talk to him every day? I mean, I have best friends, and I've had a group chat with my 3 closest friends that, we've been friends since we were 10, but I don't talk to all 3 of them every day.
Yeah, but you don't have a needy friend like me, Professor. I'm needy. For about 10 years is my guess. When we first met, so when I first got elected through the county commissioner days, then I did work for him officially after I left the county. He hired me at the chamber as director of public policy, and we did some crazy things there. Crazy enough where the board hired me as the CEO when he became a cabinet member, director of economic development and international trade for Governor Owens. He became 2 other cabinet members then, but I was the CEO for 10 years after he was CEO for 14 years. And for probably 10 or 15 years, I don't know if there's a day we missed. We were like high school girls, and I don't mean to be insulting to high school girls. I assume they talk about neat things. There was, and I'm sure we missed some days, but we talked all the time. on the
Wow.
commutes. If we had a half hour here or there, like, I'm driving or he's driving, we'd go, sorry, I can't, I'm in a meeting, but let's talk later. And we'd squeeze in 5 minutes, but we'd talk an hour, almost every day for a decade or more. I'd say that he was an important guy at the Gardens. And he had his own agenda. And the Gardens will do a great job recognizing him, so I don't need to go into all those details. But so we didn't talk every day, but at least once a week, and we'd walk. We'd walk the Highline Canal, and he loved movies. He watched more movies than any other human being I've ever done, known, and he loved songs all equally as much as you. And neither of those I'm great at, so we didn't talk about those. So we talked about politics.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, there are two things that are important to. Well, there's lots of important things. One is, yes, rules and laws are important. He was a rule of law guy. He's a constitutionalist as well, but he would say culture is always more important than what the law is. So in an organization, you can hear the keynote speaker. What are people saying about the speech in private to their friends afterwards? That's what's
Right.
important. Culture, what we're actually talking about when no one's watching, what we're doing when no one's watching. And he thinks culture is way more important than what the actual law says. The law is important, but you got to have the culture. So he was a big culture person. And I think the other thing he was good at that maybe we can learn, well, lots of things, but is that he always would say it's always about something else. So when I'd
Mm.
call and say, "Hey, this thing," or "the governor ripped into me," or "Gosh, I got a chamber member who's just not mean," or and
Right.
he'd go, "Well, it's always about something else." And so we would brainstorm what the something else could be, why this person had negative behavior or was mean spirited, and as soon
Right.
as you figure out what the something else is, when the reason somebody wants to meet with you or yell at you or engage with you, then it makes the conversation much easier. And I think, Bart, that's probably one little element that he has over most of us is he's playing chess a couple chess moves ahead, thinking about what they're doing with each other and how we can help each other. And what's the about else that they're not articulating? Or they may not even know. They may be in personal pain and not know why they're being crabby that day.
Right. I always thought it was funny that metaphor. People say, "Oh, he's playing three-dimensional chess," and I was like, "Really?" Because most people are hitting each other with rocks. And I'm appreciative of when somebody's at least playing checkers, because that means they're playing a game with rules. And the person who's actually just playing regular chess, I mean, that's about the best a human being can be. I've never met one of these 3D chess guys.
Yeah, I
Uh,
don't know. I don't think he was doing 3D chess, but I do think he
yeah.
was being very thoughtful and thinking ahead of things that just not living in the moment. Although he lived in the moment pretty good too. Huh, I don't know. He was a complex
Yeah,
person.
and I do have it did make me think of another friendship I have. The historian Tom Brasino, who we've had on
Yeah,
several times. He is
Army War College.
yeah, Army War College, and he's one of those guys who every time he's on, his kids are all, or well, as they're all getting out of the house now, but he was a very involved wrestling dad and still is, and so he's the guy who calls me every time he's driving somewhere,
Yeah.
and he's going to some wrestling tournament, and we'll have long conversations. And then
And
another historian, George Nash, is probably the guy who I talk to for the we start when we get going on a Sunday afternoon, we'll sometimes stretch it into 2 and 3 hours talking about Herbert Hoover, which is not something a lot of people can do.
why don't you share some of that in a future episode
Yeah,
with
yeah. So I was wondering if I could maybe toss it to you to traffic cop some of the Q and
Okay,
A.
yeah, since I know the folks.
Well, yeah, I was going to say because I think everybody who is zoomed in, and maybe you would do a better job of
Yeah, I'm
traffic.
happy to, Professor.
Yeah.
But don't hesitate, Bart and Professor, to jump back in if you have some historical insight or some nuances. I will take it back from here. Thank you. So, team, I think I know everybody on the crowd. There's a couple that don't have full names, so I'm not sure. Like Taylor, I don't know if that's my daughter or some other Taylor I know, or maybe I don't know a Taylor. Anyway, I can tell you how kind it is of you to want to just chat about Brian for a little bit. You don't have to make a comment or a question, or you don't have to, but this is a good time. He just died this week, and I'd like you to share something about your life or his or our society. And you can do that by raising your hand. You can take yourself off mute or put yourself off video if you like, any of the above, and I will call on you.
John, it looks like Pamela's raised her hand.
Pam, it's been a few years. What an honor to see you or hear from you. What would you like to say, or what's your question?
Yeah, so great to see you and everyone. You asked earlier, what we can do. Oh, sorry. We can live and walk out his legacy. During those times when we would have conversation, I talked to him about my sister and her drug abuse. And those two little gentlemen that you see next to me in that picture are her kids. I'm going to adopt them this year. Brian just had such a way of being an example. And not just on the personal stuff. I was honored to be an ambassador through the incorporation of the city of Centennial and launching the light rail and just so many other things. And so it's been really hard to learn of his passing.
Oh, Pam.
He's such a great friend.
Yeah, Pamela, you've got such a good soul and always have. So I didn't know Brian was so helpful to you, and that's awesome. I'm
Yeah.
not surprised, but I'm pleased. I'm so glad you knew him, and so glad you found him helpful.
Yeah. And something that's really quite cool. At the end of our conversation about my sister and how he's able to lift people up, he said, "So, my convertible's outside. Do you want to go for a ride?" And I was like blown away. I was like, "Really?" And so just
He only had that. It was
he's
blue, wasn't
amazing.
it? He only
It
had it for like
was.
a year.
Yeah. Yeah. And then yeah, just I enjoyed all the networking, all the learning. It greatly formed my professional life and supported my personal life, and I'm just so thankful, and thank you for doing this today.
Yeah, Pamela, what an honor to hear your voice again. So thank you so much for your comments. Karen, you took yourself off video or on video, I think. So it looks like you probably have a comment.
Yes, Brian affected me so much. Believe it or
Past chair of the
not,
board of the South Metro Chamber.
I was. I met him when my daughter was in a baby carrier, my eldest. So I know exactly, she's 33 years old this year. So I've known him 33 years. And I would say he gave me a voice and challenged me. And I remember him always, and John was always right there with him when they would say, dream big and do bigger. One of the things, I was sitting in the Seattle Chihuly Museum watching a movie, and he's in the movie because he brought that artwork to the gardens, and that was one of the first outdoor displays that Chihuly had ever done, and it impacted a renowned artist to have to build things that go indoors and outdoors. And so when you say look around, there are so many things that I think are deeper than we ever thought he was involved with. I was watching the Amatchi National Historic Site movie about the new national monument. He was instrumental in getting that approved. I mean, the little things on politics that we worked on together that he was always pushing me out, because I think he didn't want to be arrested in Littleton when we'd put up political signs where we shouldn't, but he'd always give me a load, and I'd go out and do the water. That Amendment C and D was the first campaign I worked on with him, but he was always asking me, which campaign are you going to work on this time? Because since I've met him, I have always picked a political campaign each election, and worked on it. Not
That's
necessarily with him, but something that I believe in, because he wanted me to do what I believe in. And for that, I thank him very much. And I thank you too, John.
no, but isn't that true? He wanted you to do what you wanted to do, not what he wanted you to do. Just pick a campaign, find something to be engaged in, and get
And
involved.
do it. He'd say,
Yeah.
use your voice.
Ah,
So
lovely.
thank you for letting me say something. I
Yeah,
appreciate
thrilled
it.
to see you, Karen. Thank you. Corbin Sackdahl, you took yourself, you're on video now, former Arapahoe County assessor. And I don't tell the story we told offline, Corbin, or if you can do whatever you want. But he's now head of the Assessors Association in Colorado, one of the dear friends of Brian's. Glad to see you, Corbin. What
Well,
questions
thank
or comments?
yeah, so thanks for having me. I was shocked and probably saw Brian a year ago. He invited me down to the gardens to have lunch. Going back, how do I know Brian? Primarily through John. However, when they lived on Ridge Road, two doors down, Seal and Irv Elliott were my parents' best friends. And so when I was a little guy and Brian was probably a little guy, every once in a while we'd run into each other. But then we lost contact, went our separate ways and grew up. And when John was commissioner, he pushed me really hard to run for Arapahoe County assessor. I was in the office as a commercial appraiser, and he brought Brian in, and it was great to see Brian and reconnect. And Brian became my campaign manager for 3 successful elections. I always had somebody run against me. You know, one of the things that, Brian is a good leader. So every time we would meet, he would kind of have a checklist. You need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this, you need to do that. Like it might have been Bart that mentioned, I was not a good politician. I'm a numbers guy, as John knows. Give me a spreadsheet and I will run numbers. John and I go back a long way, and we've run a lot of races together, a lot of relay races together, and I'll have a
Hey,
spreadsheet.
Corbin, let me interrupt. Didn't Brian crew for us on our
Yeah, he
first
crewed for
marathon?
us. He has crewed for us. And he ran or he walked one of, well, I'll tell you what, I could tell a lot of stories with John. But I will bring up one story. We were doing a relay race, and I think it was the Cherry Creek, what was it called? Cherry Creek
Relay or something? Yeah.
Ethan or something like
Water,
that.
watershed
And
relay. Yeah.
so Brian's gonna walk, and of course he's a big, tall guy and long strides. And so Brian's gonna walk one leg. And so we get to some point, and I have a spreadsheet. I know, Brian's gonna walk probably 18-minute miles, this how many miles he's gonna arrive at the where we're gonna change out runners at a certain time. Well, John sees a convenience store. Well, I got to go in for a breakfast burrito, or I got to go in for this. And I'm grabbing John. I'm like, we got to go. We got to go. And I can't get John out. And we
Well, it
show
needed to
up
be
for one of
microwave.
the exchanges, and our runner's sitting there going, hello. And I'm like, John. So anyway, Brian was involved in a lot of things, a lot of activities. But I do remember one time, and I think my first campaign would have been 2006. And he said, you got to get on Facebook. And I said, I don't want to be on Facebook. And nope, you got to get on Facebook. I really don't like social media. I don't like social media to this day. I think it's very
Neither did he, by the way.
positive, but it's all in our lives. And so yes, I get on social media. I can't raise money. I just can't ask people for money. And Brian was just always that good leader. Wonderful to work with, caring, just a great manager. And so, I'm just shocked when John called me. I mean, it was just, I'm just still in shock. I think of him every day. He's a wonderful, wonderful person and a human being, and he will be in all of our hearts forever. And so I think that's it.
Thank you, Corby. Really appreciate you. He admired and appreciated you the entire time. Thank you for running and serving with dignity. You may not be a great politician, but you're a hell of a good public servant. Thank you. Kim, would you like to have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I would. And I don't know why. It's very weird that this has hit me so hard because I didn't know Brian really well compared to many of you, but I did know him and I feel like I knew him really well. And I know that he was there for me a couple of times. Once when I was abruptly thrown out of a role at Icosa Media and didn't know what to do with myself. My first call was to you, John. My third call was to my husband. My fourth call was to Brian. Because I just knew he would be able to give me some sense of direction because I was a bit rudderless in that moment. And I just knew I wanted to keep following the example he had set for you and you had set for me. And so I just want to say that. Also, it's funny when we were listening, I was listening to Professor, he said something about imagining the best version of yourself. This is my notebook that goes as a companion to the book I wrote 10 years ago. And it says, imagine the best version of yourself and work to be that person. And I think somehow that's part of why this has hit me so hard because I wanted to be like Brian. And I was planning to try and rally to run against Lauren Boebert and then changed my mind abruptly when I saw who was running because it was just, well, it was what it was. It was crazy. And now, strangely, the world has changed for me and we're moving to Washington, D.C. And I'm not done doing whatever it is I'm supposed to do, but I don't know what that is yet. So I don't know. I'll be thinking about him a lot.
Yeah, and I know he very much liked you, Kim, and the work we did together. Thank you. All right, who's up next?
John, I can go.
Please.
Everyone, this is Mike Vaughn. John, it's been a
Nice to see
long
you, Mike.
time since we've seen each other. Thanks so much for doing this. Brian to me was a mentor and a really good friend. I saw him last in December, so just a few months back. For those that don't know, I served on the Denver Botanic Gardens Board of Trustees during the transformation period. I led the technology task force for Denver Botanic Gardens for 5 years. So I worked very closely with Brian. And, I think of him more than just a friend. I think of him as a brother. And, his passing is really, really sad. And I'll share something personal as well as the fact that I'm a cancer survivor, John. I've been cancer free for 3 years now. So when I saw Brian back in December and his health, we followed similar journey, so that really hit home for me too. It is a pleasure and honor to work with Brian. And, it is interesting. I don't know if everyone knows about the $75 million transformation that went on with Denver Botanic Gardens, clearing the gates. We put, video cameras out there, and the security and the website and the internet, and we did everything during that time. And to me, it was such an honor and pleasure to work with Brian on a volunteer basis, work daily with him and his visions and things that it is. And, you're right. I mean, he didn't want to have a plaque or anything else. He honestly, go to the gardens and look around, and you can see the impact that he has made in the Denver community. That's what I would say. In fact, I'm going there this afternoon. I'm going to be seeing Sue Hawk, who used to be the CEO of CSIA during that time. And we're going to remember Brian, So I'll leave you with one quick thing that I always thought was funny. So whenever I would meet with Brian, he always wanted to go outside the office and walk the gardens. Anytime we had like a meeting or whatever, we want to walk the grounds and walk the gardens. And I will tell you this, that I loved that because it put us on this field of friends and this field of, brotherhood, if you will. And I always thought it was funny too, because he's a very tall guy and I'm short and 5'5". So I felt like I was on the movie of Twins, So every time I was walking around, in fact, he would sit down purposefully so we could kind of see each other more eye to eye, So, and one other thing I did want to mention too is that I actually took that term of onward with his signature line 15 years ago. I still use it today. I work for a defense contractor today. I lead the software design engineering group over here. And he's part of the reason why I have my job today, because he helped me as far as to get this moving forward in my career. So thanks again, John. I really, really do appreciate it. I hope we can see each other here soon.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Brian always spoke when you were doing all that work. He spoke regularly about you. Thank you. Well done.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
In fact, it does have one other thing I'd like to mention about Brian. When I first got elected, Steve, Professor, he said, John, don't spend time at the county office. The work of a county commissioner isn't in the county administration building. Go meet people, go to their organizations, go do stuff. Just so that walking around the garden, you can't be sitting at your desk pretending you're doing something. Go out and actually do something. Meet
Right.
people, listen to them, engage. Such sound advice. Mike, awesome job. Okay, who's up next? No pressure. You can go the whole show and not say anything if you wish, but now's your time to jump in.
Hey, John, can I ask a question instead of sharing a memory?
Patrick, how are you? Nice to see you, and I'm glad you're not driving while you're on video. Well, you can do whatever you wish, Patrick.
Well, I'm curious. You and Professor Tootle talked a lot earlier about some of the really prominent historical figures that Brian shared some traits with, and we talked a lot about his leadership traits. I'm curious, what kind of leaders did Brian look up to? Who was he inspired by? And is there any contemporaries today that we can look to? Obviously not that would fill the void left by Brian's departure, but just somebody that we can look for inspiration.
Yeah, gosh, I love that question. I don't want to tell you the full truth because it brings us right into politics, and I want people across the philosophical and political spectrums to admire him. Sorry, I just do. They can hate me, but I want them to admire Brian. There are some. This will be hints. We went and met John McCain together live when he was running for president. Brian thought John McCain is a hero, pure in and pure out. Ralph Carr, former governor of Colorado. It is not a mistake that the Amachi and the internment of the Japanese. Brian, yes, wanted to honor the Amachi Rose and the Japanese garden at the Denver Botanic Gardens. Yes, he wanted to do that, but he was also sending a message that we need to stand up and do the right thing in society. And Governor Carr did the right thing and lost his job for it. A lot of people don't know that Brian was considering running for Congress himself, was asked by a former congressman to run. And I remember sitting, I think it was just three of us, Brian, the consultant, and me. There might have been one other person in the office. And the consultant was saying, we're going to do all these surveys and we're going to ask questions of the population and do polls so we can know what you think. And Brian goes, I don't want to do any of that. And he goes, well, how will you know what you think? And he goes, I know what I think. And he goes, well, yeah, but you can't get elected. People won't elect you on what you think. You need to think what they think. And he goes, well, I'll ask people what they think, but I don't want to poll. I know what my beliefs are, and I'm going to tell people my beliefs, and I'm going to listen to theirs, and maybe I'll change my beliefs based off theirs, but we don't need to scientifically process this stuff. We're going to go out and campaign. And he decided not to run for office because he didn't think he could get elected in today's weird environment of poll-tested issues. He thinks that's really dangerous for society to just go with what the democracy wants. Hey, we're all mad at this. Let's all run over there and do that. He didn't want to be a part of that. So there's a lot of contemporary figures, Patrick, that he does not admire. In fact, he resents it. He was angry about it. 5 days ago, we were talking about this same kind of conversation. He asked me, actually. So I guess I should task this group. He asked me last Thursday, John, who do we identify that can help us get out of this mess in Colorado? Maybe nationally too, but who do you like, John? And I gave him a couple names. I'm meeting with one next week, but how do we have better leadership? How do we identify leadership in our own and demand better from our leaders? So this is I'm going to pitch it right back to you, Patrick. Let's look for those leaders. I found some. You, Bart, there's lots of folks that we engage with. We all need to do a better job. Meredith, did you say something? Oh, how's this for a hint? His beagles, not the most recent two, but his beagles. Reagan and Thatcher. Sorry, liberals. I know, I know he has a ton of liberal friends, but um, he was a conservative through and through, an old school conservative. Hey, Professor, you'll appreciate this. I don't know why I can't see you. Um,
I'm here. I'm here.
yeah, Professor. Pro-gay is not the right word. You're always better with words. But Brian was not only just tolerant; he was loving towards gays. Trans too. I know that's not politically correct, but he has empathy for that. He doesn't understand it. We talked about this 3 weeks ago. But why anger about anything, Patrick? He similar to your philosophy. You're a constitutional conservative, and I don't like labels, and neither did he, by the way. But how do we just respect each other as human beings? It's just the individual, what we bring to the table, and how do we then work together for some joint problem solving? We don't have to argue about every nit nat thing that we disagree on. And that right now, it seems like we find out what we disagree on and focus on that. And he never wanted to do any of that. He wanted to find what we agreed on and work it to make it better, to make life more enjoyable to increase our standard of living, our quality of life. Uh, why be mean towards each other? I don't know if that helped, Patrick. And Professor, you say a lot of that during our conversations over the last 4 years.
Sure. And I just I think it's a shame that so often the term conservatism or um, gets lumped together with what you might call reaction, someone who's a reactionary. But if we want to, remove the label and say, instead of thinking about this as a label that we bestow upon people, how about this? How about somebody who's motivated by love and what they are for, to allow for the creation of a belief system that says everyone is going to be free in order to choose to do good in society. And if it makes you angry to put a label on that, let's just leave the label off. But if you are dedicated to the ideas that people should be free in order to live good lives, and you don't want to be free in order to be a bad person and in order to express your hatreds, but you want to be free in order to do good, in order to be kind, and that your primary political motivation is love. Let's not use the C word, and let's just say that that's what he was for.
Yeah, and that's a good description of him. Patrick, one other line. It's been Brian and I are aligned a lot on this stuff, and actually, so are you, Professor. The immigration battle in today's is so alien to him. It's inconceivable why we are trying to hate on people that are coming who want to love America and want to save their family or have a better life, and they want to contribute. He just is astounded. He was besides himself with embarrassment. Embarrassment's not right. Just like, well, there's a way better path than what we're currently in. And so anybody and it doesn't have to be about those issues I just talked about. Let's just look for better leadership.
Yeah.
And
I was just going to say, this reminds me of something. It's a great distiller of words, although he is a somewhat divisive figure, is Dick Cheney. And
Really?
and I always felt like he was the best on the issue of gay rights when he said freedom means freedom for everyone. And when he gave instructions to his daughters on how they should act, he just said, defend the republic. I think that if you want to call, remembering that freedom means freedom for everyone, if you want to call that conservatism, or I would just say these are people who are motivated by love, and that what they want to do is be kind to the person who's right in front of them. Again, using
I love that. Patrick, that's a good transition, Professor. Patrick, if Brian was here instead of me, he could list 1,000 names of people he admires because he met with them. and he looks at him and goes, "You would be good at that, and you're doing well at this. And why don't you consider something else in addition to in the future?" So, who are the leaders that he admires? There's a ton of them. There, he surrounded himself with board members at the chamber and with fellow cabinet members, and at the gardens. He'd select great staff, and he probably had, it's a big board at the gardens, like 30 or 40 folks, and that over 18 years. He would be able to identify something kind to say about Cynthia, who is one of Colorado's great leaders on the call, who talked. I mean, he would be able to tell you over and over and over and over. And I guess what we need to do is ask each of us to run for the library board or the school board or city council, or engage in your church, or maybe the Little League leadership team, or whatever. We should all just do a little bit more than we're currently doing. If we want to fix Washington, we should all probably do those kind of things that I just said, and then Washington will fix itself. I mean, we'll all demand that Washington changes. I don't know. What do you think? Is that good enough, or do you have a specific, Patrick?
That'll work. Thanks. It was a very Brian answer. It leads to more questions than it does answers.
Good. I'm channeling Brian effectively then, and thank you for the compliment. Okay. Who else has a question? Or you're good, Patrick? We only have like 15 minutes left, so this is your time to jump in and have a comment or a question, or you won't get your chance.
I have more questions for you, John, if you're.
Let's do one quick one just as a stall till I see somebody else off the mic.
I guess I just want to know how you're doing.
Horrible. Thanks for asking about horrible. I'm blocking out most of it, and probably will for a couple more weeks or even a couple months. I don't know. I don't think I want to block it forever. Horrible.
Yeah, that didn't buy much time.
Yeah, I'm not doing well.
Yeah. Maybe to turn you to happier times, I said I didn't want to skip the middle part of your relationship either. We kind of talked about the origins and we talked about the end, but what about that? What about that middle 15 years? Not the first 5 and not the last 5. What was your relationship like with Brian in the middle 10?
So, have you ever met the weird guy?
Oh, that would be Tony, our producer, right?
No, it's me.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So Brian has always been the statesman and the thoughtful guy, but whenever I could get Brian out of his element, I would. So we went shooting with a militia group, which just horribly embarrassing for him, because these people were scary. But we were with the county sheriff too. I brought the county sheriff and him. There was like
probably a good idea.
Oh well, yeah, but he was mad too. He couldn't believe that I brought him to the militia group. Anyway,
now, in terms of the rankings of the Colorado militia groups, I have a stereotype that the militia groups that would be in the sort of southeastern quadrant of Colorado, would those be the moderate militia groups?
I'm not an expert on militia groups, but I will tell you. Yeah. When they raised the Confederate flag, and then when they shot a weapon that was like 16 feet long with the bullet was this size, and then we walked down range a couple hundred yards and it went through a piece of steel. It was an armored piercing exploding tip into a VW bug that exploded on the other side. These people were nuts. And then when we went to the restaurant about 5 miles away from it, we go, "What is the deal with that militia group thing?" And the answer from the barkeep was, "What militia group?" "Well, the ranger." And he's going, "Nope, there's nothing like that around here."
I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Oh my God. Anyway, so I like having fun. So we did it when we hiked the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. That was in the middle.
Okay.
We were tent mates.
You learn a lot about a guy when you share a tent with him, right?
We do on a 15 or 16,000 foot pass. Yeah. We went on gubernatorial trade missions to South America and to Prague. We did leadership rafting trips. You just you name some weird thing. What's that, Meredith? Oh, splunking. So Brian is like 6'6", I think. 6'5" or 6'6".
Not built for caves.
Yeah, oh, he told Alaric, Alaric, think some weird fantasy fiction novel, Alaric, crazy-eyed hair. We
Yeah.
want the toughest, we're all world-class splunkers, I'm telling Alaric. We want the toughest, hardest splunking off guided tour that we can. And we did. And Brian was stuck for like an hour in this part because his femur's too long. He can't get through that damn thing. Yeah, Brian was not happy with me on that. I thought it was kind of funny until I realized how panicked he actually was. You know, dying in a cave is not a fun way to die, I don't think.
So did he was obviously into plants and gardens and nature, but did he have a favorite and you already mentioned one novel, but did he have a favorite novel or a favorite poem in addition to the
Yeah,
poetry?
and I feel guilty about this. He begged me for years to read Joseph Campbell's.
Okay.
It's like mythology or art of, I don't, what is it? Yeah, I can't. It's Joseph Campbell, and it's
Right.
kind of, you know, he had a degree in anthropology and a specialty in hieroglyphics and ancient Egypt, and so he was into studying of cultures and how it happened, and the intersection between Christianity and other religions, you know, Greek and Roman gods, and he was a really complex guy, and that's not my area of expertise. The hero's journey could be. I he was a really deep thinker, professor. He's like you. I don't know all those deep things. I'm more of a street fighter. He was a philosopher. I don't know. He did like, I mentioned it to you. I don't think you particularly like it, or at least you said at lunch you didn't like it, but he really thought the fourth turning was important. Strauss and Howe on how societies changed. I know Drew Bullen, who's a cabinet member with Governor Owens, he's on the call too, and that's a favorite book of his. You know, on how we should be aware of cultural trends and how we should behave rightly and help guide society along. He always just thought we all need to be better leaders and better citizens, leaders and followers. We don't have to be a leader in everything. There's a lot of things we should just follow good leaders on. So anything religious, political, philosophical, societal, and if he could watch the movie instead of read the book, sorry, this will really offend you. He'd probably watch the movie. Um, uh, and there's a practical thing for that. I think he had some slight version of dyslexia, so he had a harder time reading books. But you would
Hey,
love
I'm the
Doctor.
first to say that the Lord of the Rings, the movies are better than the books, which
Yeah, yeah.
everybody who loves the books, you know, considers that, you know, heresy. But I love the movies. The books were okay, you know. I didn't.
I
I,
love the book,
I
so we
can't.
differ on that.
Yeah.
Okay, Professor, let's see if I can get suss this out of a couple people. Drew, do you want to make a comment before we hang up? Maria, Dan, just take yourself off mute and I'll call on you. Susan, you're on a lot of our shows. Thank you for your active engagement. Corbin, you want to make another comment? Go ahead and make it short. I'm trying to get some other folks in.
Yeah, well, it's not really a comment. You talked about his dogs. Did he have any pets? I feel like after Reagan and he got another dog,
Well,
didn't he?
Reagan and Thatcher, and then he had
Yeah.
Sky.
And did he
Uh,
have any pets when he passed away?
he felt very fortunate. He had this. I don't think she's on the call, and I know she's going to listen to it later. One of his dearest friends, lifelong friends, is from college. Did a year abroad in Lancaster. The year after my sister went to Lancaster, and they stayed friends. They talk once a week every year for the last 40 years. Dave Novell, and his daughter is like a daughter to Brian. I think he's the goddaughter, but actually like a real daughter. Brian loves that family. He had some premonition, he thinks, in hindsight, and he decided to go to England to visit them a year ago, December, not this last December, a year ago, December. And then his dog died. His last dog died. He had two other beagles, and his last dog died. And then so he was, you know, you wait a couple months and he was pondering another dog. He just loves animals, just completely. And here's a secret for only a few people know. What Brian, sorry, Denver Botanic Gardens fans, Brian said if he had another dream job after the gardens, it would be the director of the zoo. He loves animals. So that was kind of a dream job of his, is to be the zoo CEO, not the CEO of the Botanic Gardens. That dog died, and then he started to get ill. And then it got worse, and then it got worse. And in hindsight, we talked about this just 5 days ago, Corbin, how fortunate he feels not to have a dog because he couldn't have kept up with the dog.
And two other really fast questions. he has a sister, right?
He does, and she came and spent 3 nights,
Okay.
3 or 4 nights just last week. 2 of those nights, I also spent the night at his home.
And where does the sister live?
Washington, and
Okay.
her son came and visited,
Okay.
and we talked yesterday. Yeah, and that was a nice story on how they've reconnected
Okay.
more significantly over this last year. That's a real positive in society, family society. It was.
Okay.
Thanks for
Thank
asking
you.
the question. She's delightful. Okay, we have 9 minutes left. Team, thank you for calling in. This is your time, Shelley. I'm so glad to see your name. Uh,
Hey, John,
Shelley.
oh, sorry.
Um, oh, go ahead, please,
No,
Maria.
yeah, I would like to jump in just for a minute. And John, I am so sorry for your loss. You were the first person I thought of when I heard the news. Um, my memories of Brian are truly, I just sum it up as he was just a lovely, lovely human. Um, I first met him in, I think it was 98, a long time ago, when I started at Interfaith. And he was so huge at the chamber in helping me um, get established, get an organization that had been around for 30 years more well known, get more support for it through the chamber. And then even when he moved to the gardens, he didn't stop thinking about his hometown, right? So he gave us membership passes to be able to give out to our families. You know, and for the folks who are the working poor, the gardens are a huge luxury for a lot of folks, you know, and that he was still thinking about those folks. I look back to, if you remember these meetings, John, with the Common Sense Party, when we
Yeah.
tried to bring some common sense to politics so long ago.
Yet another failure. Yes, Brian and I tried to start a new political party. Yeah.
We tried, we put our stuff into it, but you know, I'm so grateful that I've had the opportunity to know him all these years and learn from him and learn from you after him. So I just thank you and yeah, I'm just so sorry for you, for our community. He could have done, you know, there were still great things out there.
Oh, you're so nice, Maria.
Thank
Thank you. And
you.
by the way, you must have found the fountain of youth or something. You look younger and younger every year. You're looking great.
No, it's first off, cancer truly does suck.
No, but you look
But
great.
but since COVID, I have gotten really good at playing with makeup.
Ah,
So
well,
that is what I tell everyone.
it works and you look vibrant.
So,
So good at you.
so thank you.
Thanks for your
Mhm.
message. Shelley, you don't have to say anything, Shelley, but I know you know Brian pretty well politically. It would be nice to have an insight of yours if you're so inclined. Your microphone's not working. Okay, well, Shelley Schaefer is one of the best teammates who have ever met. She's been, I don't know what your position is, but worked directly for Governor Owens for years, if not decades. I think it's decades, and knows Brian really well. And you sent a really nice message to me, Shelley. Thank you for that. Sorry your microphone's not working. I'd love to hear your voice. 30 years. Wow, God. It's a long time to be with Governor Owens, Shelley. Okay, let's see. Don, do you have anything? Sandon, Susan, Dan, we're going to hang up here shortly.
I think
Drew, I
Drew.
can't believe you're not saying something. Oh, Anthony, you want to go?
I think Drew was raising his hand.
Oh, gotcha. I can't see it yet, but Drew,
Anthony can go. Anthony can go first.
I think he was recognizing you, Drew. So you're up.
Well,
Yeah,
I'll try to do this. One of my sayings that I had heard that I like a lot is just that it seems that we're like trees, and all of our family and friends and loved ones are like tree rings, and they're always part of us. Then there's again, I'll stay out of politics, but let me just say I'm a voting member in a nonprofit organization, and I have a chairman who's been hounding me for how I'm going to vote on this thing or that thing. And normally I would just, my normal state would be just to like, keep it to myself and just, blow it off, don't do my thing. But I'm going to actually call him up and be statesmanlike and tell him how I'm going to vote. And it's because what would Brian do?
Yeah. Yeah, Brian's really amazing at that, about direct conversation, and say your piece and say it respectfully, stand your ground, and that's a nice comment, Drew.
Thank
The
you.
you used to go on our leadership rafting trips with us in Mad Max, and then you went down to Machu Peru with us.
It was a
You know,
blast.
you were a cabinet member with Brian too. So what a long relationship you've had, Drew. Thanks for joining.
Well, one of many. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, it is now 4 minutes. We end in 4 minutes. Last call. I think I'm authorized to say this. Bob Lee, his executor. Heck, yeah, I can say this. Mark your calendar for June 12th. It'll be a public celebration of Brian's life at the Denver Botanic Gardens on June 12th. We didn't want to do it right away. We wanted to give some time to think about it and to honor his legacy in at least 3 major fields, and most important, just with each other. I mean, everybody's touched. By the way, I don't. It's not hero worship. It's not. I don't think he's a god. I think he's as human as any of the rest of us. He is. He is deeply human, just like all of us. Yeah, but he's smart and thoughtful and respectful and works harder. And when he makes a mistake, boy, it really hurts him, and he tries to figure out how not to do that again. I've seen it, and he does a better job of it than I do. It's not hero worship, though, and I don't think he wants to be treated as a hero in life or in death. Anyway, just want that on the record. He's purely human. Stanka, did you want to say anything before we hang up? Can you hear us from Slovenia? And I can't see if you're taking yourself off. So let me just give one line on Ukraine. Brian and I went to Slovenia, met with the ambassador and the leadership of the Slovenian. We talked about homeland security and emergency management at the local level, and how in the United States, the local sheriff and the police chief, et cetera, have the power, and then the state comes in to support them, and then the federal government and FEMA. But FEMA's not in charge. The local sheriff or cop or fireman on the ground is the one that's in charge, and that's alien to people in Eastern Europe and mostly around the world because they have top-down systems. And so Brian and I went to Slovenia, and then the year later, Bill Owens went to Slovenia, and the year later, the president, I think it was Bush, went to Slovenia because Slovenia was accepted into NATO. Those people wanted freedom; they wanted to be part of, like, the United States rather than Russia. And so anyway, Brian and I are claiming credit for Slovenia and the expansion of NATO. That's a gross exaggeration. But yes, we did a lot of things together. Okay, last call. Bart, do you want to say anything else before we finish up with the professor?
No, other than saying thanks for doing this, John. This was really wonderful.
Thank you. Appreciate you. I see some comments. Good. All right, Professor Tootle, you get to wrap up in 1 minute or less. Thanks so much for facilitating this with us.
I just want to say that that even though this was a conversation about one person, it is also a good reminder for all of us about how important friendship is, and how important it is to try to at least, be our authentic selves, but also think about how we affect others. And I just want to say how much I have appreciated you and Bart and Tony and over the last 4 years, and has it been 4 or 5 years now?
Right.
And just, I mean, I've always had a love for Colorado, and one of the great things about us keeping this going as long is that I get to continue to have this relationship with Colorado. And it feels like in a lot of ways that this was a celebration today of the best of Colorado.
It is. And your wonderful former teacher professor at the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley, thank you for doing that. And thanks for keeping that connection. All right, friends, thanks for joining us. I'm going to cut us off. A last thought. This won't surprise you. Please send some love in Brian's direction. Thank you all.